we balance the books. His scripted lines are showing that he has not even listened to the budget himself. So I will try a different question. Perhaps he can give something that is unscripted to the people watching. Farmers across the United Kingdom... Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Mr.
Order! I don't need any help. Can I just say, if somebody wants to leave, I'll be helping them do that. I'm going to hear the question, and I certainly want to hear the answer as well. So please, let's have some courtesy.
Mr. Speaker, we have heard him repeat the lines on the television, fixing the foundations and so on. But what does he say, over and over again, but what does he say to farmers who are facing uncertainty about their futures as a result of the increased taxes announced by the Chancellor? I am very clear that we would reverse Labour's cruel family farms tax. What can he say now to reassure the farming community, who provide security for the whole nation?
Prime Minister.
I'm happy to help the Leader of the Opposition. If she's going to complain about scripted answers, it's probably best not to read that from a script. What I will say about farmers is this. I'm glad she's raised farmers, because the budget last week put £5 billion over the next 2 years into farming. That's the single biggest increase, unlike the £300 million, which was an underspend under the last government. And when it comes to inheritance, the vast majority of farmers will be unaffected, as she well knows, as they well know. But that budget was about fixing the foundations, fixing the whole £22 billion that they left, and investing in the future of our country, investing in our NHS, investing in our schools, in our hospitals and our homes. And I'm proud that that's the investment work. And if they oppose it, they should go out there and tell their constituents they're against that investment in the future of our country. That's the difference. A Labour government taking us forward. They're stuck in the past.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I'm going to hear Matthew Patrick.
Mr. Speaker, Emily left her ex, but the abuse did not stop. He stayed in their home, cancelled the mortgage contributions and destroyed her credit score. Now she cannot even take out a mobile phone contract. Surviving economic abuse and UK finance have made progress tackling this issue, but more has to be done. Will the Prime Minister and his government work with me to introduce new provisions so that we can restore the credit files for survivors of economic abuse like Emily?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for raising this really important issue, because economic abuse has a devastating impact on victims, leaving them vulnerable and isolated. And we are committed to ending this national emergency and keeping women safe from domestic abuse, harassment and stalking. And, Mr. Speaker, that includes £200,000 this year to the charity Surviving Economic Abuse, and HMRC have launched an online tool to help charities and businesses identify and respond to economic abuse. And I'll make sure he has a meeting with the relevant minister.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Can I join the Prime Minister in his comments about Remembrance Sunday? We must always remember the brave British men and women who gave their lives for our country. And can I join him in welcoming the Conservative leader to her place? And can I congratulate her on becoming the first black leader of a UK-wide party, a major and historic achievement? Mr. Speaker, President-elect Trump praised Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. And I quote, he called it genius. He also said he would encourage Russia to do whatever the hell they want to NATO allies. So what action is the Prime Minister taking to encourage a Trump presidency to change its mind? Because otherwise it's a huge threat to global security and to national security in the UK. Does he agree with me that the US will not oppose President Putin and support our brave Ukrainian allies? The UK must lead in Europe so that together we do.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud that in this House we are united on the question of Ukraine and clear about Russian aggression, and we will continue to do so. I've long taken the view that the only winner, if we are divided in this House, is Putin, and I'm not prepared to let that happen. Our relationship with the US is a strong relationship forged in very difficult circumstances historically. It remains as strong today as it was when it was first forged, and I look forward to working with President-elect Trump to ensure that relationship stays the special relationship.
Shred David.
I'm grateful for the Prime Minister's comments on Ukraine, but Donald Trump has also said that trade wars are good. He calls himself tariff man. People are really worried that Trump trade wars and tariff will damage our economy, damage businesses, and hit the cost of living here in the UK. So, given this, does the Prime Minister recognise that it's more urgent than ever that we support our British economy by getting rid of the damaging trade barriers with Europe put in place by the Conservatives?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as he will know, we've put the economy centrepiece to our budget, and we will do everything that we need to do to ensure our economy grows, and that's measured in living standards going up for working people across the country. Thank you.
Alex Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are so many families across Aldershot and Farnborough who have struggled for years to get their children the need they help with special educational needs. It is therefore shameful to read misguided claims that autistic people may well get better treatment and receive economic privileges and protections made by the Leader of the Opposition. Will the Prime Minister stand with families of autistic children and distance this government from those awful words?
Mr. Speaker, I'll leave the Leader of the Opposition to respond to those words. As the recent NAO report exposed, under the previous government, children with SEND were being failed by the system, and this has come up, I think, now 5 times in the last 2 or 3 weeks at PMQs. It's clearly a serious issue. Our focus will be ensuring every child receives the right support to succeed in their education.
Sorcerer Eastwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, Northern Ireland is considered one of the most dangerous places in Europe to be a woman. In the last 4 years, 24 women have been killed. But one of the most dangerous places for women and girls is online. I also want to pay tribute to the work of Belfast and Lisburn Women's Aid, who are tireless in their advocacy for women. So what is this government doing to keep women and girls safe online, not just in Lagan Valley, but right across the United Kingdom?
Prime Minister.
Well, the right honourable member is right to draw attention to this issue. Misogyny and abuse, both online and offline, causes horrendous harm to women and girls across the UK. And can I just commend her honesty and bravery in speaking out about her own experiences and her dedication to creating safe spaces for women in her constituency. We must create a safer world online for women and girls through the Online Safety Act, mitigating the risk of illegal content and activity which is abusive or incites hatred.
Bill Cole.
Everyone in Southwark will benefit from the positive measures in the budget last week, especially the thousands on the minimum wage, getting a real terms increase to help themselves, help their families and help the economy. But the new leader of the Tory party, this week's leader, is on record as saying she wants to scrap it, having seemingly learnt nothing from July. Will the Prime Minister pledge to protect the minimum wage and increase it in this Parliament as finances allow?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the last Labour government transformed the labour market with the national minimum wage, something which was opposed by the party opposite at the time. And sadly, they don't seem to have changed. I was surprised by the comments of the Leader of the Opposition. I was surprised to see the new Shadow Business Secretary say the minimum wage, and this is a quote, something legislators pass to make themselves feel good. I disagree, and I'm very proud of the fact that this Labour government has raised wages for 3 million of low-paid workers, and I expect the party opposite to welcome that.
George Freeman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After 14 years shaping the UK's long-term strategies for life science, agri-tech, fusion and space, I welcome the government's industrial strategy. But too many of our great companies are being bought out by our competitors. To build the industries of tomorrow here, we need to unlock some of the hundreds of billions in UK pension funds in the city, only 3% of which are now investing in UK equities. With the new Lord Mayor making this a priority and the Mansion House speech imminent, will the new government commit to see through the last government's reforms to unlock British capital for British R&D growth?
Well, I thank you for welcoming the industrial strategy. And I do know this is an issue close to his heart that he has spoken about and acted on for many years. The budget sees record numbers of R&D investment with over 20 billion next year, including over 2 billion to support our world-leading life sciences sector. And through the British Growth Partnership, we'll crowd in pension funds investment to support innovative business. And we've launched our landmark pensions review to unlock the billions of investment into the UK and boost growth and living standards across the country. Thank you.
Catherine Brooks.
Mr. Speaker, as the Chancellor said last week, we were left a toxic legacy by the previous government, including rivers filled with polluted waste. Will the Prime Minister put the River Wye into special measures by designating it a water protection zone? And will he meet with me and the excellent cross-border Wye Catchment Partnership to deliver their plan to clean up the Wye?
Prime Minister.
The River Wye is one of our most important, iconic rivers, and we are working closely with the Welsh Government on this pressing issue. A destruction of our waterways should never have been allowed, and that's why we launched a Water Commission to attract investment and speed up infrastructure delivery. And we introduced legislation to enable tougher penalties and severe fines to crack down on polluters. I will make sure that she gets a meeting with the relevant minister.
Baron of the House to Edmund
As a good lawyer, I know the Prime Minister will want to listen to the evidence. So if the evidence mounts from experts in organisations such as the NFU that smaller family farms of average size, 250 acres, are going to be severely impacted by this tax, in a spirit of compromise, will he listen to the evidence, keep an open mind, and perhaps be prepared to raise the thresholds to preserve our family farms?
Mr. Speaker, we are listening to farmers, and the Environment Secretary and the Treasury Ministers met with the NFU on Monday of this week. We have taken a fair and balanced approach. The vast majority of farms will not be affected by this. But what I will also say this, having grown up in a rural community, I know that rural communities also need an NHS that's back on its feet. They also need schools that their children can go to and homes that their families can afford to live in. But we will continue to talk to the NFU and others.
Eric Glendon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week, the Leader of the Opposition told us that any outrage at suitcases full of wine and karaoke machines in Downing Street, whilst people across the country were told to stay at home, was all overblown. For the people and businesses in my constituency who followed the rules, many of us at great personal cost, this is an insult. Will the Prime Minister join me in ensuring that as a country we learn the lessons from COVID, and as a party the Conservatives learn the lessons of their behaviour too?
Mr. Speaker, across the country people made enormous sacrifices during COVID. They missed weddings, births, deaths. Really important moments in their lives and their families' lives. In doing so, they saved the lives of people they will probably never meet. That was a collective effort, and unfortunately the party opposite who set the rules did not follow them themselves. It was a betrayal of those that did, and I think the Leader of the Opposition was wrong to describe the public anger and upset as overblown. I'm sure she'll want to clarify that at the first opportunity.
Cyfeirydd
Glenhorse Nursing Home is in my constituency in Ysmôn. Tell me that the budget changes mean a 10% increase in their cost. That's a staggering 127,500 extra in-year cost. Will the Prime Minister reconsider the rise in the employer's national insurance?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what we did in the budget last week was to ensure that no one would face tax rises in their pay slip. We had to deal with the £22 billion black hole, but when we did so, we protected the smallest businesses and charities. We doubled the employment allowance to £10,500. That means that 40% of employers won't pay employers' NICs. Companies with 4 employees or less on a minimum wage will pay no employer NICs at all, and half of businesses that pay NICs will see no change or pay less after the budget. Thank you.
Bill Brickle.
Yeah, my constituents in Bolton West were pleased to hear last week's budget prioritise investment in public infrastructure, including important projects such as the electrification of the Wigan to Bolton railway line, which will deliver more reliable and greener journeys. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that investment in the key infrastructure of towns such as Horwich, West Horton, Blackrod and Bolton is the only way to deliver economic growth and prosperity for all?
Prime Minister.
Well, my honourable friend is a champion for the North West, and the budget secured investment for vital transport projects to transform connectivity across the north of England and drive economic growth. And that includes completing the Wigan to Bolton electrification, a really important momentum on the Northern Powerhouse Rail. Over £5 billion to support everyday journeys for working people. By restoring economic stability, increasing investment, we're taking our country forward.
Victoria Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Swan Youth Project in Berkhamsted is an incredible drop-in centre that intervenes to bring hope and a better future to teenagers like Lex and Megan who've been facing anxiety, depression and long mental health waiting lists, as well as families coping with SEND. They've already written to the Treasury saying that they're worried about getting the funds that they need as our communities face a tough winter and grants are depleting. Parole, the manager, also assures me that she makes a mean curry and would welcome the Prime Minister. So will the Prime Minister join me to discuss their concerns and ensure that organisations in the third sector like theirs get the support that they need as they work tirelessly for our communities?
Prime Minister.
She'll be pleased now. I've been to Berkhamsted a number of times. We've got very good friends who live there. And I want to pay tribute to the work of the Swan Youth Project, because too many young people, she's cited some, are struggling with mental health and not receiving the support that they need. And that's why we will recruit an additional 8,500 mental health workers and are introducing reforms to the Mental Health Act, long overdue, and that's happening today. Of course, we will also put more money into SEND, but we also need to look at reforming SEND, something that I think and hope will be supported across this House, and I'll make sure she gets a meeting with the relevant ministers about that.
My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, will know that after 14 years of Tory ideological hostility and cuts, our universities are in financial meltdown. In my own constituency of Norwich South, the University of East Anglia is having to make redundancies, as are many others. Our honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Education, has started to address the problem, but we need a longer-term solution that doesn't simply saddle more debt on our young people. So can my right honourable friend say how we can move to fix the foundations of higher education as we go forward?
Prime Minister.
I thank him for that question. He's right to raise higher education, because we inherited a sector facing severe financial challenges. Universities have suffered real terms decline in their income, and the gap between disadvantaged students and their peers is the highest on record. We've had to take tough decisions to put that on a secure footing, but we are also taking the step of easing the living pressures by increasing the maintenance loans, which is worth £414 extra per year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Alex Brooke.
Hamilton, former sub-postmistress and constituent of North East Hampshire, has long been campaigning, along with Alan Bates, for compensation following the Horizon Post Office scandal. Can the Prime Minister give an exact time frame in which those who have been waiting over a decade might finally be compensated.
I'm grateful to her for raising this important issue because a commitment was made to properly compensate the victims of this scandal. Unfortunately, regrettably, having made that commitment, the party opposite, when in government, didn't allocate any money to that compensation. Her constituents will be pleased to know that we have changed the approach there. We've set out the compensation within the budget, a transparent budget, an accountable budget, and we'll make the payments just as soon as we can.
Horticultural.
Speaker, may I quickly echo the Prime Minister's sentiments to that other son of Lewis, though I wish I had woken up today in the Isle of Harris. My constituents there face long delays, cancellations and loss of service because of the SNP's incompetent handling of ferry procurement. In last week's budget, the Scottish Government received a record settlement. Can I urge the Prime Minister to tell the Scottish ministers to use that to improve public service in Scotland, to invest in the NHS in Hill and Year, to build schools in places like Barra, and to finally fix the ferry fiasco?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, last week in the budget we delivered the largest settlement for the Scottish Government in real terms since devolution. That includes £3.4 billion through the Barnett formula, a fuel duty freeze, an increase to the national living wage, benefiting his constituencies and all those across Scotland. And the result of the budget is now clear. The SNP in power in Scotland have the powers, they now have the money, they've got no more excuses.
Gonna be objected.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister really think it is acceptable for a backbench MP to suggest that the Leader of the Opposition represents white supremacy in blackface and is the most prominent member of white supremacy's black collaborator class, with all the race traitor innuendo that that carries? And if he doesn't, why hasn't he removed the whip?
Prime Minister.
No, I don't.
John Slinger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a semi-retired violinist and rock musician asking a semi-retired multi-instrumentalist, I feel confident that the Prime Minister shares my belief in the importance of music education. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that as we unleash the potential of our country, we must invest in the educational infrastructure of creative arts subjects so that they're accessible to all? And will he visit my constituency to see the great work of the schools there, despite the inheritance we received?
Prime Minister.
I'm not sure about the description semi-retired, although that may be the wish of the party opposite. But on music, what I do know from personal experience is music, the creatives and art are really important for children and young people in terms of the pleasure it gives them, the knowledge, but the working in groups and the leadership. And that's why we are determined to ensure that they are counted subjects again within the curriculum, which will encourage many more schools to provide it within the curriculum and enrich the futures of children and young people across the country.
James Cleverly.
Before the election, he claimed that he would not put up national insurance contributions. He put it up. Before the election, he claimed he would scrap tuition fees. He put it up. Before the election, he said he would not tax family farms. He's taxing family farms. Will he address his party's growing reputation for dishonesty by making good on his commitment to close the Wethersfield Asylum Accommodation Centre in my constituency?
Mr. Speaker, we're keeping the promises we made in our manifesto. His problem is he can't add up. If he could add up, he might be down here rather than up there. And we'll take up the issue of his constituency.
Douglas McAllister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Monday of this week marked the 7-year anniversary of my constituent Jagtar Singh Johal's arbitrary detention in India. Can the Prime Minister assure me that he and his government will do all they can to secure his immediate release and bring him home?
Yes, Yes, we're absolutely committed to pushing the Government of India on this really important case. And the Foreign Secretary has raised it and will continue to do so, and we'll make sure that we speak to him as we do.
Right, that completes Prime Minister's questions. Urgent question, Leader of the House. Is it related to PMQs?
It is relating to PMQs, Mr. Speaker. It's an urgent question. I just wondered whether the Leader of the Opposition wanted to correct the record, because she said in Prime Minister's question that the Chancellor didn't mention defence spending in her budget, yet she mentioned it many, many times, including allocating £2.9 billion, which far exceeds our...
Well, can I first of all say it's not for me to correct the record, and it's not a point of order, but you've already done it for them. Right, we'll now come to the urgent question. Chris Phil.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could I ask the Home Secretary to make a statement on the recent increase in dangerous, illegal and unnecessary channel crossings by small boat?
Mr. Speaker, for too long smuggling gangs have been undermining our border security and putting lives at risk, which is why the new government has made it a top priority to address the crisis we inherited. And let us be clear about what that crisis entailed. Small boat crossings in the first half of the year at their highest point on record, and over 100,000 arrivals in the 5 years prior. Over 200,000 cases stuck in the asylum system, costing the taxpayer billions in support, and 700 million spent on a gimmick that sent just 4 volunteers to Rwanda. When we entered government, we said it was time for grip, not gimmicks, and that is exactly what we are delivering. Since July, we have established the Border Security Command, headed up by experienced Police Chief Martin Hewitt. In the King's speech, we set out our intention to bring forward legislation to give the border security system stronger powers to investigate and prosecute organised immigration crime. We're recruiting 100 new specialist agency and investigation officers at the National Crime Agency to target and dismantle the criminal networks behind this phenomenon. And we have announced an extra £75 million to bolster border security, bringing our investment in the Border Security Command over the next 2 years to £150 million. This government's border security funding will go towards a range of enforcement and intelligence activities and capabilities, including covert technology, as well as hundreds of staff and specialist investigators as we crank up the pressure on the smuggling gangs. This is an international problem requiring international solutions. Since the general election, we have intensified cooperation with partners overseas. We recently struck a new anti-smuggling action plan with G7 partners, and the Prime Minister and Home Secretary both attended the Interpol General Assembly in Glasgow on Monday to press the case for a much stronger and more integrated global response to organised immigration crime. As well as tackling this issue upstream, we've taken action to speed up decision-making and stepped up returns of those with no right to be in this country. The result of all this action is 9,400 returns since this government took office, including a 19% increase in enforced returns and a 14% increase in returns of foreign national offenders. Mr. Speaker, sticking plasters and gimmicks have failed. The smugglers and traffickers have been getting away with it for far too long. It's time to show them we're serious, not with words, but with action. The security of Britain's borders is paramount, and under this government, it always will be.
Shadow Leader of the House, Chris.
Shadow Home Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm afraid the government's actions belie the reality. Since they came to office, 17,000 520 people have crossed the English Channel, more than twice the number they've removed. That is 1.5 times the number in the previous 4 months, and it is 15% more than the same period last year. In October alone, last month, 5,417 people crossed. That is 3 times higher than last October. And tragically, since this government came to office, 50 people have lost their lives or have gone missing. That is more than the previous 18 months put together. And tragically, that includes 16 women and children. Now, this government they chose to cancel the Rwanda scheme before it had even started. The first flight was due to take off, I believe, from memory, on the 24th of July, but they cancelled it. Now, had they allowed that flight to go ahead, had they allowed the scheme to continue, the deterrent effect would by now have started. And we know it works. We know it works because it worked in Australia under their Operation Sovereign Borders about 10 years ago. We know the deterrent effect of returns works because it worked with Albania, where we secured a 93% reduction in arrivals. And don't take my word for it, the National Crime Agency said that law enforcement alone is not enough and you need an effective removal scheme in order to deter crossings. Their announcements in Glasgow on Monday are simply not enough, and they simply repeat work underway already. But it's not just the NCA and me saying we need a returns deterrent. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen encouraged member states just a few weeks ago to develop their own returns hubs outside of the EU. So will she follow Ursula von der Leyen's advice and urgently implement offshore processing? Might I also draw attention to the success Belgium has had in stopping boats by the shore? Will she ask France to do the same? And finally, Mr. Speaker, because of their failings, Labour is breaking their manifesto pledge to end hotel use. So will she pledge not to open any more hotels?
Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I say, first of all, in welcoming him to his new front bench position, what a pleasure it is to be opposite him. And I'm going to look forward to jousting with him over the years. On Rwanda, from when it began to when we scrapped it, during that period, 83,500 people crossed in small boats. If that's a deterrent, then I think the honourable gentleman has got a peculiar view of what the meaning of deterrence is in the English language. Now, obviously, Mr. Speaker, when I realised we were doing this UQ, I took the opportunity of having a look at his record as a Home Office minister. And while he was a minister at the Home Office, for his first stint, during his first stint at the Home Office, September 2019 to 2021, 23,849 people crossed the Channel on small boats. When he was, during his second ministerial sojourn at the Home Office, 50,637 people crossed the Channel in small boats. So his overall total is 74,486. He was saying in September 2021, the honourable member for Croydon South answered one of these UQs, and I'm quoting him here. He said, "This government," meaning the last government, "will not rest until we've taken the necessary steps to completely end these crossings." How did that go, Mr. Speaker?
Mike Tapp.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2018, 400 crossed the Channel. Since then, over 140,000 have crossed, the majority of which were on the party opposite's watch. And all they could introduce were ridiculous gimmicks like Rwanda, which cost the taxpayers millions of pounds. Does the Minister agree that the new injection of cash into the Border Security Command is a better use of taxpayers' money than the gimmicks the party opposite introduced?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I agree wholeheartedly with that. The issue here is dealing with cross-border organised immigration crime, and to do that, you have to, Mr. Speaker, talk to your international allies and cooperate with them cross-border. That is exactly what the creation of the Border Security Command will do, both operationally and politically, and we will see the results.
We now come to the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, Lisa Smart.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I want to join the Minister in welcoming the new Shadow Home Secretary to his place. Leading with the chin on the first full day in the job is an interesting approach, but if any situation highlights the manifest failings of the last Conservative government, it is surely this. We in this House, Mr Speaker, all want to stop the dangerous channel crossings, and I'm afraid the last government totally failed at this, so I really am surprised we are discussing this today. The asylum backlog ballooned under the Tories, and the human beings we are talking about who are in these small boats are often victims to smuggling and trafficking gangs who profit on human suffering. So does the Minister agree that it is therefore imperative that we work closer than ever before in coordination with Europol and our French counterparts to smash these criminal networks? I urge the government, while I'm on my feet, Mr Speaker, to address the root causes of this problem, not just the symptoms. We must empower the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office to provide robust aid to regions in an increasingly unstable world.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Honourable Lady is exactly right. This isn't about gimmicks. It's not about having a parallel immigration policy that's unconnected with any of the treaties we've signed or international law. It's about doing the day job and making sure that you don't leave your inheritor government a 200,000 person backlog because you haven't been doing the day job. The issue with small boat crossings is to deal with organised, internationally focused immigration crime, which is often originated in countries very far away. We have to cooperate with the forces of law and order and operationally across borders to tackle this, and that is what this government is determined to do.
Sean Davis.
Can I welcome the government's approach on this issue, a 23% increase in enforced removals compared to last summer, and agree with the Minister that the way to deal with this issue is to smash the criminal gangs. Can I urge her, though, to consider what attention she gives to the Shadow Home Secretary, who, when he was the Home Office Minister, imposed hotels on my constituency and was the Chief Secretary of State to Liz Truss during the mini-budget?
Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I think that the honourable gentleman's record in office is a matter that we may well keep coming back to. I agree with the observations that my honourable friend has made.
Chair of the Select Committee, Dame Curran Bradley.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Everybody in this House wants to see an end to small boat crossings and the risk that people put themselves at to cross the Channel. She's announced a number of measures this week. Would she give an assessment of when she expects those measures to start to see a reduction in crossings, and will she commit to keeping the Select Committee informed of progress?
Minister.
Well, it's my first chance, Mr Speaker, to congratulate the Right Honourable Lady on her chairing of the Select Committee, and as always I look forward to coming before her whenever she feels she wishes to talk to me, and certainly the department I know wish to keep her informed about what is going on. I think there's been a significant shift in international cooperation with the G7 collaboration on smuggling, with the European political community dialogues, and there's a meeting tomorrow where we hope there'll be some announcements. And also the government's been working on bilateral memorandums of understandings and action plans across Europe to achieve a step change in cooperation cross-border, which is the key to beginning to tackle this awful criminal smuggling activity.
Chris Murray. Mr Wyatt.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In the 5 years before the election, I worked on preventing human trafficking in Scotland, including with many of the victims who came on small boat crossings. They have gone through the most appalling abuse that chills the soul. Does the Minister agree with me that public money is far better spent on smashing the gangs and freeing the victims than it is in a Rwanda plan that was never going to work?
Yes, Mr Speaker, I agree profoundly with my honourable friend, which is why the new government has changed tack in this area, and I'm sure we will see the results in due course.
Thank you,
Mr Speaker. The government has pledged millions of pounds to smashing the gang on top of the millions of pounds that we spent on stopping boats. The government has pledged more drones on the Channel and fast-tracking of cases like we deployed drones on the Channel and fast-tracked cases. The government has set up a border security command, which sounds remarkably similar to the small boats operational command that we set up when in government. What, other than scrapping the one thing that would have worked, i.e. the deterrent, has this government done that is different, that is actually going to stop the boats?
Well, firstly, the Border Security Command is completely different operationally to the command on the Channel, which is deliberately there to try to save life and find out what's going on the water. Operationally, the Border Security Command will cooperate across borders in a much different way. And if I were the Right Honourable Lady, I wouldn't be boasting about the morass of colossal wasted expenditure that the Rwanda scheme represented. £700 million down the drain, with plans to spend nearly £10 billion over the next few years on that plan. It was a gross waste of money which didn't deter a single boat crossing.
Holly Billington.
Mr. Speaker, the gangs who run this vile trade care only for their own profits, not for the lives that they put at risk. Will the Minister reassure this House and my constituents of East Thanet that everything that will be done by the Border Security Command to break the evil smuggling gangs and bring the ringleaders to justice?
Yes, that is the point of the increase in operational cooperation cross borders, so that if we can't bring people to justice in our jurisdiction, we can ensure that information is swapped in real time so that these people can be brought to justice in other jurisdictions. There's going to be a step change in that kind of international cooperation, which will deliver results.
James Cleverly.
Will she describe clearly, without bluster, unambiguously, the difference in function between the Border Security Command and the Small Boats Operation Command?
Mr. Speaker, the Border Security Command isn't only focused on channel crossings. It's much more about using our intelligence capabilities and our operational arm to cooperate cross borders in other jurisdictions in real time to ensure that organised criminal gangs can be tracked and apprehended so that they can be dismantled. And the thing is that we have given now 150 million extra to the Border Security Command to start doing this work, whereas the command on the Channel is about saving lives and cooperating with the French once people have reached the beaches. It's far too late once people have reached the beaches. We need to go far back to the origin countries and do a lot more work there.
Amanda Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Minister acknowledge the real concerns felt by people in the UK and in my city of Portsmouth around the small boat crossings? And, Mr. Speaker, does the Minister agree that the recent 23% increase in enforced returns of people who have no right to be here compared to last summer shows what can be done when grown-ups are in the room and when a government focuses on getting agreement?
Yeah. Mr. Speaker, I agree absolutely with the points that my honourable friend has just made.
Mr. Speaker, there are 120 conflicts globally. This and other factors such as poverty, food insecurity, the effects of climate change cause populations to move. Does the Minister agree that it is essential, as my honourable friend pointed out, that we look at the root causes of immigration, and therefore does she support an increase in the development and aid budget rather than the cut in ODA in the budget last week?
Well, Mr. Speaker, in the end, any work we can do upstream, whether it's development work or aid, is going to deal with some of the causes, and the Honourable Lady is right to point out what some of those are. However, we have to stay within the bounds set by the budget, but I can assure her that I regard prevention as much better than cure.
Mr. Strafford.
The situation on our borders, it was failing on all fronts. Record numbers of tragic deaths in the Channel, millions wasted on the failed Rwanda gimmick, and criminal gangs profiteering off exploiting our borders. Can the Minister reassure my constituents that, unlike the previous government, we won't waste time on political gimmicks, but will focus on the practical measures that can bring an end to the persistence of these damning failures?
Mr Speaker, I can assure my honourable friend that we will do exactly that, and that's why we've seen a step change in returns since this government took office. 9,400 in that period, including a 19% increase in enforced returns and a 14% increase in returns of foreign national offenders. We will ensure that our immigration system has integrity, Mr.
Speaker, sometimes when you listen to exchanges between the Labour front bench and the Conservatives, you actually forget that we are dealing with real people fleeing the most unimaginable horrors. So can I ask the Minister, other than this berserk Rwanda plan, why is she continuing with the same failed approach as the Tories? They continue to spend millions on hotels, drones, various bits of high tech. How about trying something different? How about looking at safe and legal routes to smash the gangs? And how about showing some compassion?
I'm not going to get into a competition with the honourable gentleman about compassion. We have a duty to ensure that people that come to our shores who are asylum seekers are properly processed and dealt with and integrated into our society if that is granted. But what I'm not going to do, despite the honourable gentleman chuntering away, is stand here and say that we're going to let people smugglers for money exploiting people decide who comes to our country. We have to stop this trade. That is not at odds with treating those who arrive here with compassion.
Joe White.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I stood for election on the 4th of July this year, my commitment to my voters is that we would smash the criminal gangs and stop the small boats. At that point in time, the number of small boat crossings was 6% higher than the worst ever year of 2022. Does the Minister welcome with me that that data, compared to 2022, we are now 9,000 lower than what we were then?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, but I think the House has to have patience. There are no magic wands to wave in this area, and there are no fantasy policies now we've gotten rid of the Rwanda scheme. What there is hard, day-to-day operational work to try to get the system we inherited, which is in complete chaos with huge backlogs, back into some kind of order so that we can run it properly, fairly and efficiently, and that is what we are focusing on.
Andrew Snow.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I recently listened to an interview with a retired former Inspector of Borders and Immigration who was responding to the announcements the government has made, and his concerns that he outlined were that the measures in their own right, without an effective deterrent, he was concerned about what impact they will actually have and how the government is going to measure the success of the announcements that have been made in terms of the percentage or volume of small boat crossings that they want to see reduced for the announcements they've made. So can the Minister confirm, as a result of the announcements that were made, what percentage reduction in small boats the government would view as success?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not getting into a numbers game in this House. We are trying to deal with a trade that was allowed to become established on the previous government's watch, which has been industrialised on the previous government's watch, which we are now trying to dismantle. I'm not going to stand here and say it will happen overnight, but we will make progress.
Fred Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And folks in Plymouth are really interested in how the government is going to solve this big problem. They will welcome the increase in money towards this problem and the increase in returns. But another thing they want is constructive, lively debate with ideas in this place. Unfortunately, the opposition seems so devoid of ideas, Mr. Speaker. They're going to bang on for another 4 years about a failed scheme that got firmly rejected by the electorate. This was their landmark policy, Stop the Boats, Rwanda. It was rejected firmly. Does the Minister agree with me that the first sign of insanity is trying the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Rupert Lowe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the Home Office annual report, it is confirmed that for 2022-3, £3 billion was spent on hotel costs for illegal migrants, averaging £8 million a day. The cruel inheritance tax assault on British family farms and businesses is estimated to eventually raise £520 million per year. Does this Labour government need to urgently rethink its spending priorities?
No, Mr. Speaker, we've just had a budget that we're in the middle of debating and voting on, and I expect that that will be the way we go forwards.
Badenoch.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The 23% increase in returns of people who have no right to be here is a really positive step in giving the public confidence in our systems. Can I ask the Minister what measures are in place to continue to ensure that our processes remain robust and that the trajectory of returns continues?
Well, we are ensuring that the enforcement part of the Home Office that deals with returns is given the resources it needs to do that job. But in order to make it even more successful, we have to engage with those countries where we wish to return people so that we can have papers issued. And again, the significant shift in international cooperation is what will deliver that.
If Rwanda was a gimmick, why are Germany, Austria, Bulgaria, Cyprus, the Netherlands, Poland and Romania looking at similar schemes? And given the number of crossings and deaths in the Channel, would it not, with hindsight, have been wise to at least allow the Rwanda scheme a trial run?
They aren't considering a Rwanda scheme, Mr. Speaker. They are all saying that they are going to stay within the confines of international law. The Rwanda scheme definitely tore up international law, and it was planned to spend nearly £10 billion up until 2027 on trying to remove 250 people a week from this country and spending nearly £3 billion on extra detention camps for them in this country. I don't think that represents British values or good value for money.
Lawrence Stern.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Given that only 3% of people who arrived by small boat between 2018 and June 2024 have been returned, a period of reflection from the Conservative Party on this issue would be welcome. Does she agree that the government that dispenses with gimmicks and focuses on the day job is delivering that progress on returns?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, but don't underestimate the fact that under the Illegal Migration Act, nobody who arrived in that way could be processed. So there are 118,000 people waiting to be processed because they stopped the system dead. We have to get the system going and process going again, which is what we are doing, so we can get the flow of decisions, return those who aren't entitled to be here, and integrate those who are.
So, Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government has a mandate for trying out its approach, and I wish it well. Personally, I've always felt that unless the boats are intercepted and turned back near the start of their journey, nothing will deter the people from using that method. But can the Minister, who I respect greatly, explain to us how it's possible to smash gangs that operate in other jurisdictions once they get to the point where they withdraw their headquarters to countries where there is no possibility of cooperation with the authorities in charge of those states?
Well, getting to that level of withdrawal would be a fantastic development, which would put incredible pressure on a lot of the supply lines that are currently being used. So if we could get to that stage, I think we would already have made significant progress. And the answer to what the Right Honourable Gentleman is talking about is international cooperation to put the maximum pressure on this internationally terrible trade in human lives and exploitation. And I'm glad that he's giving me a little bit of time to prove that we can make a difference.
Sarah Coombs.
Mr. Speaker,
People in West Brom are appalled by these criminal smuggling gangs. Does the Minister agree with me that the last government wasted £700 million on the totally failed Rwanda scheme? And could she set out how this new government is going to fix the situation?
Wasted.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and it's the repurposing of some of that money and resource which hasn't been lost, which is funding the new approach.
Shocker, Adam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Minister agree with me that the loss of life is colossally too high on these channel crossings, including the loss of a 2-year-old child just the other week? Would the Minister agree with me that we should reopen safe routes so we can treat those that are coming to this country with dignity and respect that they deserve?
Mr. Speaker, I don't believe that safe routes would stop people attempting to come over the channel in small boats. So I have some sympathy with the idea of safe routes, but I don't think it would stop this trade. For example, 1,500 Indians came across, and we have a visa regime with the Indians. The highest nationality for small boat arrivals this year is the Vietnamese. Again, this is not about people who are always asylum seekers coming over. It's people who wouldn't have a right to be here but are paying to come here. So safe routes does not solve that problem.
Mark Ferguson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Shadow Home Secretary in their remarks earlier referred to the lives lost in the Channel, every single one of them a tragedy. But does the Minister agree with me that, as the Shadow Home Secretary appeared to do, trying to make a political point about those deaths, is frankly beneath the party opposite, as were gimmicks like the Rwanda scheme?
Yes, I agree. Obviously, the loss of life in the Channel this year has been the highest on record, and that is because more pressure is being put on the gangs, the boats are being overloaded, there's more anarchy on the beaches in France, and those are all things that we have to try to deal with in cooperation with our French colleagues.
My constituents want to see an end to the small boat crossings and also an end to the use of hotels for asylum seekers, something that was pledged in the government's manifesto. I'd like to ask the Minister, where hotels have seen asylum seekers moved out, will she undertake to ensure that more are not put back in?
Mr. Speaker, the issue with hotels and other dispersed accommodation is that we've inherited a backlog because of the way that the party opposite ran the system. There was no processing done of asylum seekers who then had to be put up in hotels. Hotels are a temporary, not a solution that's not something we want to deal with, and we will do our best to get out of hotels as quickly as possible by getting the system up and running, processing those who are making claims so that we can get them either approved and integrated or returned.
Alex Barringer.
When the government came to power earlier this year, it was the worst year on record for small boats crossings, 6% higher than the last year on record in 2022. This was a legacy of chaos left by the last government. While there is no room for complacency, will the Minister agree with me that we should be welcoming a 20% lower level of small boats crossings this year as compared to 2022?
I agree that the first 6 months of this year were the worst on record. There was then a quiet 3 months, and now there's been a huge increase, not least because of benign weather conditions. So I don't want to be getting into monthly figures. I think what we've got to do is bear down on the organised criminality that is perpetrating this trade so that we can disrupt it and deal with it that way.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister recognise there's a distinct lack of humanity about this whole debate and the discussion surrounding small boats and migration? Does she not recognise that those people that risk all to get into those very dangerous boats and cross the Channel are doing so out of an act of desperation? And by the lack of a safe route system across Europe, it's created a market for people traffickers. Doesn't she think it's necessary, instead of this approach, to actually look seriously at having safe routes for asylum seekers, which will avoid the tragedy of all these deaths in the Channel and, for that matter, in the Mediterranean?
I said earlier, Mr. Speaker, that safe routes wouldn't stop all the channel crossings. There's now an industrialised system run by organised immigration criminals dealing with this. The Vietnamese would never have a safe route into the UK. There's no visa system, and yet they are now 20% of the people crossing on small boats. So I don't think, with all due respect to the right honourable gentleman, that safe routes would solve the problem.
Jessica Tull.
Mr. Speaker, the last government was responsible for an asylum backlog so large that they ended up spending millions of pounds of taxpayers' money every day on asylum hotels, including in my constituency in Bournemouth West. As the Minister has said, we are now dealing with that legacy. And can I welcome her statement? And does she agree with me that we'll take no lessons from the party opposite and will continue to make progress towards our manifesto commitments to bring down the backlog and end hotel use?
Mr. Speaker, I couldn't have put it better myself.
Gregory Stafford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think there's unanimity around the House that this is a moral issue. When I raised the issue of deterrent with the Home Secretary on the 22nd of July, the last statement, she seemed to agree with me that we needed to have a deterrent. Since then, the government doesn't seem to have brought forward any specific deterrents. So will she look at, if not the Rwanda scheme, the schemes that other European nations are looking at to see if we can deter the small boats crossings?
Excellent question.
The way to deter the small boats crossings, Mr. Speaker, is to deal with those who are organising and profiting from this immoral trade, and that is what we are doing.
Colin Naismith.
Mr. Speaker, the Shadow Home Secretary and the benches opposite are still banging the drum for the failed Rwanda gimmick. Does the Minister agree with me that if the previous government were so confident that that policy was going to work, they would not have called an election before that theory could be put to the test?
I think my honourable friend makes an intriguing point, since the party opposite have said repeated times from the benches over there that they were just about to start it the week after the election, then all of a sudden it was all going to work and be perfect. After 83,500 people crossed the small boats knowing the Rwanda scheme was legislated for and in place, I suspect somehow that the date of the election might have had a bit to do with the fact that they realised the Rwanda scheme was going to fail.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister is claiming credit for an increase in deportations of people who have no right to be in this country. So I want an exact or an approximate figure, please, Mr. Speaker, of how many of these 9,400 people have been sent back since the Labour government come in have actually arrived here on small boats since 2018.
Mr. Speaker, since the party opposite processed virtually nobody who came over on a small boat, they're still in the asylum backlog system that we're attempting to deal with.
Laura Kirkesmith.
I'm pleased to see this government taking swift action to tackle the small boats crisis, including scrapping the Rwanda scheme, which was not only ludicrously expensive, but inhumane and ineffective. Can the Minister confirm that it is possible to manage our borders in a way that is both effective and humane, and that we will do that?
Mr. Speaker, that is certainly the balance that this government is aiming to achieve.
Sir Ashley Fox.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister has said that her policy to smash the criminal gangs will reduce the number of migrants crossing the Channel. Can she give the House her estimation of when that policy will start to work?
Mr. Speaker, I said in answer to an earlier question that there are no magic wands in this area, that it's hard, tough, operational processing and cooperation internationally that will begin to bear down on this. It's work by the National Crime Agency, it's work by prosecutorial authorities, often cross borders in different jurisdictions. So the fact that we've made such a good start in terms of international cooperation and the significant shift in attention here will bear down on this. But I'm not going to stand at this dispatch box and pretend that there's an easy time frame or an easy answer as to when this will have the effect that we all want it to have. But we will bear down on it and we will make progress.
Steve Young.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At a time of highly stretched resources right across government,
thanks to the mess in public finances that were left by the party opposite, I know that my constituents will be pleased that 75 million has been secured for further investment in Border Security Command. Does the Minister agree with me that it's a far better use of taxpayers' money than paying people to go to Rwanda or housing them in hotels at great expense?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, it's advisable to try to deal with the causes of a problem, the immediate causes being organised immigration, criminality, as well as bearing down on the longer-term causes, which are often about political stability in other areas of the world.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Minister very much for her answers to the questions. I want to take a slightly different look, and I welcome the fact that smugglers will now be treated using terrorism powers, as it is my firm belief, and the belief of this House, I believe, that the continued abuse of the asylum system is tantamount to invasion. Can the Minister assure us that those who come across the Northern Ireland border will have the same application of power under the terrorism provisions? Thank you so much.
There will be a border security bill coming forwards, and perhaps the honourable gentleman would want to serve on the committee so that he can make certain that the points he's just made are accurately reflected by the government in that bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the most colossal failures we saw under the previous government was the chaos in the Channel and the associated backlog in the system. And yet they seem to have come here today to tell the British people that they had it all under control. I wonder if the Minister can reassure my constituents of the serious steps she is taking to disrupt the gangs, speed up returns and end this chaos.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, his constituents can be assured that there is a great deal of work going on, more resources being applied, there's a lot more intelligence being gathered, much of which can't be discussed publicly. We are on it, Mr. Speaker.
Kevin McKenna.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I strongly welcome the government's focus on tackling the root causes of organised crime behind these small boats, rather than the gimmicks of the previous government. Across Kent, these criminal gangs are fuelling a rise in organised crime, and in my constituency of Sittingbourne and Sheppey, it's pushing up rural crime, street crime, antisocial behaviour. Can I ask my honourable friend the Minister to ensure that the new Border Security Command works closely with Kent Police to actually make sure that the effect across the whole of Kent and of course the wider country is dealt with?
I can give my honourable friend that assurance. There are particular areas have suffered particular pressure from this phenomenon over the years, and Kent is obviously one of those, so I'm acutely aware of the pressure that he and the local authorities in the area are under.
Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the last 14 years, the party opposite saw this become an increasingly growing crisis. They've spoken much today about how we need a deterrent. Does the Minister agree with me, though, that for somebody who's willing to get into a very questionably seaworthy vessel and cross one of the busiest shipping lanes on the planet, that a 3% chance of a trip to Kigali is not a deterrent? And in fact, the only way of getting a handle on this and dealing with this is to get back to where the problem originates. Waiting for people to get to the Channel is delaying a response and is creating the crisis that they oversaw.
Mr. Speaker, I agree very much with the observations that my honourable friend has made, and so do the figures. 83,500 people came across in small boats during the date when the Rwanda scheme was announced and the date of the last general election. The honourable gentleman says it hadn't started, but they began by saying Rwanda would be a deterrent just when it was published as a bill, and then every time it made no difference, they took it back and said, oh, it will work, it will work. It never would have worked. It cost £700 million, and they had budgeted, but not budgeted, for nearly £10 billion of expenditure by the end of that scheme.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that at the end of 2022, under the last Conservative government, the asylum backlog had reached 166,261, an 11-fold increase in 12 years, does my honourable friend agree with me that honourable and right honourable members opposite, who are very small in number for their own urgent question, are exhibiting a high degree of audacity.
They are, Mr. Speaker, and perhaps they should also be reminded that returns collapsed on their watch as well.
Right, so that completes the urgent question. Let the front benches change round. Before I call on Member for Ashfield to make his personal statement, I remind the House that such statements should be heard in silence and without interruption. I call Lee Anderson.
Mr. Speaker, with permission, Mr. Speaker, I will make a personal statement in compliance with the findings of the Independent Expert Panel on its report. I accept the findings of the Independent Expert Panel and the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards in full and without reservation. On the 23rd of November 2023, at the Derby Gate entrance, I was involved in an incident with a security guard. During the incident, I spoke to the complainant in a manner that was totally unacceptable and which included swearing and other language that goes against the House of Commons bullying and harassment policy. I would like to apologise to the complainant and to this House for my behaviour. Our security staff do an incredible job and should always be treated with the utmost of respect. The standards of an MP's behaviour must always be at the highest standard. I give you and this House my firm assurance that I have learned significant lessons through this process and a firm undertaking that such behaviour on my part will never happen again. Thank you.
Please, sir. John MacDonald.
Mr. Speaker, I just wondered whether you'd received any notice of a statement from the government. I know a number of members have written...
But sit down, please. Sorry.
That's all right. I know a number of members have written to the Foreign Secretary in particular with regard to the case of the writer and human rights activist Alaa Abd El Fattah, who served 5 years in an Egyptian prison for organising human rights protests, meant to be released in September, hasn't been released. His mother, Layla, has been on hunger strike for 4 weeks now, and many of us are concerned that she risks her life. Could I ask whether or not if a statement is not forthcoming, maybe the Treasury bench could take back and urge the government to make firm representations to Egypt to release Mr. Alaa Abd El Fattah?
In danger of answering your own point. Can I just say, look, I've had no notification of a statement coming, but I'm absolutely sure the Treasury bench will have taken that on board. And I've got to say to the honourable gentleman, I know it won't rest here, and he'll use the other avenues that is available to ensure the profile is raised. And I would expect nothing other. Sarah Sultana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise on a point of order regarding the lack of response to my cross-party correspondence addressed to the Foreign Secretary, the Secretary of State for Business and Trade and the Defence Secretary dated 13th of September 2024. In that letter, I, with 36 parliamentary colleagues, requested clarification on the government's decision to exempt offensive F-35 fighter jet components from the 30 out of 350 licences the government has suspended for items that could be used in Israel's genocidal assault on Gaza, as there is a clear risk they may be used to commit or facilitate a serious violation of international law. Given the significance of the issue and its implications for the UK's international obligations, I believe it's imperative that MPs receive a comprehensive response. And now waiting 2 months for a reply raises questions.
Both not on the same, standing together. Look, I've absolutely got the point of order. Obviously, it's not my responsibility, but I take seriously any member of this House that is writing to the government. I expect timely replies, whoever it is from. I'm here to defend and ensure you get that reply. I'm absolutely convinced that the front bench will have heard what's being said, and they will already be looking to get that reply. If not, inform me and we'll raise it again. Thank you for that. Right, we now come to presentation of Bill. Durham-Jones. Who's nodding? Okay.
Financial assistance to Ukraine bill.
Second reading what day?
Monday the 11th.
Monday the 11th of November. Right, presentation of the bill. Secretary John Healy.
Armed Forces Commissioner bill.
Second reading what day?
Monday the 11th of November, Mr. Speaker.
Monday the 11th of November. We have the presentation of Bill Victoria Ratkins.
Child Criminal Exploitation number 2 bill.
Second reading what day?
29th of November, Mr. Speaker.
29th of November. Right. We now come to the 10-minute rule motion. Horticultural peat. I call Sarah Dyke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to provide for the prohibition of the sale in England of horticultural peat by the end of 2025, to provide for certain exemptions from that prohibition and for connected purposes. I would like to begin by paying tribute to the former Right Honourable Member for Chipping Barnet, who previously worked hard to bring this bill through Parliament. I would also like to thank the former Right Honourable Member for Taunton Deane, who also endeavoured to secure a ban on the sale of peat. Madam Deputy Speaker, Somerset is one of only 2 counties in England where peat extraction still takes place. The Somerset Levels and Moors is the second largest area of lowland deep peat in England, containing 11 million tonnes of carbon. However, drained deep peat is a major source of greenhouse gas emissions, and along with peat extraction could be responsible for as much as 255,000 tonnes of CO2 per year, according to FTEC's 2023 report. Madam Deputy Speaker, the peatlands in Somerset are extremely rare and valuable habitats for wildlife. They're the perfect place for plants such as the sundew and the marsh violet, which in turn supports invertebrates and bird populations. Banning the sale of peat and protecting both our peatlands at home and abroad is crucial. I say abroad as well because we offshore most of our peatland emissions by importing about 60% of peat used in horticulture in the UK. Now, all major parties agree to a ban of the sale of peat. The Liberal Democrats have pledged to restore peatlands and ban the use of horticultural peat, while Labour's 2024 manifesto promised to expand nature-rich habitats like peat bogs. And the last Conservative government made several attempts despite failing to ban peat in their 14 years in government. In 2011, the government stated that they wanted to voluntarily reduce the amount of peat in compost by 2020. But as the amount of peat only reduced by a quarter in the subsequent years, the threat of legislation was introduced. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, a consultation by the previous government also revealed how popular a ban on peat was, with 95% of respondents favouring a ban on retail peat by the end of the last Parliament. However, no legislation has been introduced that would ensure a ban on selling peat, so vast amounts of uncertainty remain in the industry today. I want to be absolutely clear how important it is that any legislation banning peat considers and consults with the horticultural industry. But banning horticultural peat is the right thing to do and is already supported by vast numbers in the industry and, if done correctly, brings huge opportunities for British horticulture. In September of this year, professional growers, gardeners, nursery owners, compost manufacturers, retailers and supporters of peat-free horticulture wrote to the Prime Minister demanding a sale ban. Signatories included B&Q, Co-op Supermarkets, Chris Beardshaw, Alice Flower, Chris Packham, the Soil Association, the National Trust, the Wildlife Trust, the CPRE, Evergreen Garden Care, Vitacress and the Royal Horticultural Society, to name just a few. Madam Deputy Speaker, I recently visited Durston's Garden Products just outside Street, who are the largest manufacturer of growing media in southern England. They produce 6 million bags a year and they support a ban on peat. 3/4 of the bags that Durston's currently produce are peat-free. 5 years ago, this was just 1/4. That is because they, like most of the industry, took the previous government at its word when it committed to banning peat. Durston's have done what they believed was the right thing for their business and the environment and have put in the time, the effort and the money to develop alternative growing mediums that can outperform peat. But as it stands, the investment that they have made to prepare for a peat-free market has been for nothing. Madam Deputy Speaker, Britain is a gardening nation. In fact, there are 30 million gardeners in the country, and 70% of them are interested in gardening more sustainably. The positive reaction to my bill being announced demonstrates the feeling in the industry. The chair of the Growing Media Association, Simon Blackhurst, told the industry's main trade magazine, Horticultural Week, that there is currently unfair commercial landscape as peat-based growing media is cheaper than peat-free. While Southern Trident Steve Harper said, there really is no argument for delaying a retail peat ban. And Floralive's Sean Higgs said everyone's expecting it or believes it's already in place. To reverse this would be counterproductive to the industry and undermine it on several counts. Madam Deputy Speaker, there are many fantastic examples of businesses moving towards peat-free. One such business is Kelway's in Langport in my constituency. They no longer sell compost containing peat, and they understand the shift that needs to take place. Moving towards peat-free would also help the government achieve its aim of moving towards a circular economy. Peat-free compost manufacturers want to keep supply chains close to home, with some, such as Miracle Grow, have their own on-site waste processors to produce compost, while others have partnerships with local forestry and wood processing businesses. Rocket Grow in Somerset processes digestite, a byproduct from sustainable energy, into peat-free compost. It's clear that advances in technology evidence the success of peat-free alternatives. The Royal Horticultural Society is set to be 100% peat-free by the end of 2025. They are now at the end of a second successful year of DEFRA-funded trials, growing millions of plants peat-free in partnership with 8 major wholesale growers, developing practices to help the wholesale industry transition smoothly. By ending horticultural peat at home, we can also reduce our reliance on foreign imported plants grown in peat and support British peat-free growers. Madam Deputy Speaker, now I'm fully aware that any ban would require exemptions, time for businesses to transition and support the government to help businesses move forward. But by setting dates in stone with legislation would remove the uncertainty that is damaging the industry and reducing opportunities. Madam Deputy Speaker, turning my focus briefly on the impact a ban on peat would have on peatlands. Peat grows at a rate of 1 millimetre per year, but can degrade by 1 centimetre per year if in bad condition, which sadly 86% of our peatlands are in. Now, as I touched on earlier, they are amazing and rare habitats. And with our current knowledge of the damage peat extraction has on nature, the environment, and the land around us, there is simply no excuse not to change course. Somerset faces ever more devastating flooding every winter, and the degradation and destruction of our peatlands does little to worsen its impact. By reducing peatlands' ability to absorb excess rainwater and act as a natural flood defence, as an intact peat bog would do. Madam Deputy Speaker, while preventing the sale of peat opens opportunities for world-beating peat alternatives, stopping peat extraction opens up opportunities for peat restoration, like the creation of new jobs by reskilling the existing workforce to use their expertise in managing peatlands for restoration. The destruction of these precious, important and beautiful habitats must stop. And as many experts, the public and politicians alike have outlined, we mustn't miss our chance. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I urge the House to support this bill today and ensure we take the steps that would prevent releasing thousands of tonnes of carbon, help us move towards a circular economy, open up opportunities for British horticulture and protect precious peatlands.
The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. Sir Christopher Chope. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm not going to oppose the right of the Honourable Lady to bring in a bill because I believe in the rights of people to be able to bring forward whatever bills they want. And most of them are ill-conceived. And I've spent much of my time in this place attacking bills which have got within their remit unintended consequences. And I think the Honourable Lady's bill is going to fit into that category of bills with good intentions but which will have unacceptable unintended consequences. Madam Deputy Speaker, it won't go unnoticed that this bill is a full frontal attack on British horticulture and that it's being promoted by none other than the Liberal Democrats. The Honourable Lady referred to the previous bill, which I spoke against as well, on the 16th of April, and I think it's a salutary reminder of the work of Democrats in this country that none of the 12 members of this House who supported that bill on the 16th of April is still a member of the House. The electorate gave their verdict on the ill-conceived support for that measure. And I'm delighted to say that today a number of my new colleagues and not so new colleagues have said to me, well, why can't you divide the House and oppose this bill? And I say to them, and including my right honourable friends from Rutland and Stamford and my honourable friend from mid-Buckinghamshire, that I think that we should allow the Liberal Democrats to stew in their own juice and bring forward their bill so that it can then be criticised and will never reach the statute book. But as far as the Horticultural Trades Association is concerned, one would have thought from the Honourable Lady's remarks that she was a supporter of the Horticultural Trades Association. Yesterday, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Horticultural Trades Association ran an event in this House, and I think lots of people attended, so much so that the free indoor plants that they were offering were all scooped up about halfway through. And the Honourable Lady, if she went to collect her free plants, she obviously missed the opportunity of talking to representatives of the Horticultural Trades Association who believe that her proposals will be a complete undermining of British horticulture. What is most important, and the HTA make this point, is that we should have a level playing field with European growers in this country. We want to grow more trees. Too few of those trees are being homegrown, too many of them are being imported. Likewise, we want to promote garden products, but too many of them are being imported. And a very large proportion of them are being imported from Holland. Because in Holland, far from having a peat-free environment, they are the fastest growing export market for peat into our country. They are also one of the largest importers of peat and exporters of peat. And they get a lot of their peat from Germany, Estonia, Belgium, Latvia and Sweden. They use that peat to make horticultural products which are then sold into our market because those products are more acceptable to consumers, not least because they tend to last longer, because peat is a substance which enables a plant to retain moisture and water a lot longer than those products which are peat-free, such as, for example, Madam Deputy Speaker, Keir. And some of the people who promote peat-free products don't seem to realise that when you talk about Keir as a substitute, Keir is carried out, is produced mainly in the Far East, particularly in Sri Lanka. The Keir has to be washed and desalted before it can be prepared for horticultural use. It then has to be transported halfway across the world, and that is not an ecologically friendly way of producing a peat substitute. And there's also another dimension to the issue about peat. What proportion of peat is used in horticulture? It's a very small proportion. I'm told that about 95% of the peat consumed in the world is used for peat fires. It's put into domestic boilers and mega incinerators, or as a substitute for coal or even natural gas. by concentrating just on one aspect of the use of peat in horticulture, we are ignoring the much larger problem of the burning of peat for fuel. I've looked up to see how easy it is to buy peat for fuel in this country, and the latest information I've got is that you can get a pallet of 10 or so bags of peat delivered to your home for £260, Madam Deputy Speaker. And that is peat for fuel. It comes from exactly the same source as peat for agriculture. Why are we having a go at the use of peat in horticulture and agriculture when we could be dealing with the much larger issue of what's happening in terms of peat being used for extraction for heating our homes? So this is a sensitive, emotional subject, but we need to have some hard-headed realism around it. And if you, like me, Madam Deputy Speaker, support British horticulture, then you should be very much opposing this bill, because it is, as I said, a full frontal assault upon the viability of our horticulture industry, and is going to result in less choice for all those people who engage in horticulture, whether as amateur or professional gardeners. So I urge the Honourable Lady to think carefully before she drafts her bill, and if she thinks that her bill is going to be mitigated by having a lot of exemptions set out in it, I challenge her to include on the face of her bill all the exemptions which she thinks will be necessary, because only with thousands of exemptions will this bill in any way be acceptable. So that is the challenge to her, and that's why I'm not going to oppose her bringing forward her bill, but let's see what it says. I fear it's going to be absolutely ghastly, and I'm disappointed, Madam Deputy Speaker, that this is an example of, I thought the Liberal Democrats were the friends of people working in the countryside and in agriculture and horticulture, but this bill suggests quite the reverse. So I strongly oppose this bill.
The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Vera Hobhouse, Tim Farron, Pippa Halings, Martin Wrigley, Caroline Voden, Carla Denyer, Leila Moran, Tessa Munt, Richard Ford, Vicky Slade, Steve Darling, and myself, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Sarah Dyke.
Horticultural peat prohibition of sale bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday, the 24th of January 2025.
Friday, the 24th of January 2025. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Ways and Means, adjourn debate on question. Now.
The question is as on the order paper. Jonathan Reynolds.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is a pleasure to open this final day of the debate on the Chancellor's growth budget. And as I rise, can I welcome the new shadow team? It's lovely to see them in place. I think many of us on this side would admit we were shadow ministers for longer than we ideally would have been, but I know it is a tough job at times, it is a thankless job at times, and on a personal level, I wish them well for the future. Madam Deputy Speaker, as the Chancellor rightly stated, growth is our only path to prosperity, to increased living standards and to delivering the change that the British people voted for so decisively over the summer. And we on these benches Recognise that you cannot have growth without investment. Growth demands investment in our infrastructure, into our public services, into the cities and regions that have gone overlooked and underinvested in by past administrations. And that is what this budget chooses. It chooses investment over decline. More than £100 billion of public investment into our roads and our railways, our parks and our playgrounds, our schools and our surgery. All of the things upon which a successful economy and a healthy society depend. This was a budget for affordable homes, for the NHS, for the school rebuilding programme, and, Madam Deputy Speaker, a personal priority for me as MP for Staley Bridge and Hyde, the Trans-Pennine route upgrade, including a new station at Mosley, something I'm sure the whole House can be excited and get behind. This is literally rebuilding Britain in action. And make no mistake, Madam Deputy Speaker, businesses need that public investment too, because it creates the right environment for them to thrive now and long into the future. And that's why the OBR says our increases in spending will drive up the long-term increase in GDP by up to 1.4%. I give way to the honourable member.
I'm grateful to the Secretary of State, and he makes much of growth. Of course, we all want growth. But the OBR report actually says that growth in real GDP starts to slow over the next 3 years, and in year 4 and 5 of the Parliament goes negative. So what it's telling us is that the government's budget is actually going to result in a smaller private sector, not a larger one. How is it going to explain that to business?
For its intervention, that's not what it says. First of all, he is right to say, he's right to say on the figures, you cannot make, I would say, first of all, a like-for-like comparison, because we know the information provided by the previous government in their financial information was erroneous. They did not square their own spending pledges with what was in those documents. Now, the analysis by the OBR shows that long-term improvement in GDP growth is absolutely vital, but I would say to him, and he will recognise this, what it cannot do, what it cannot model, is some of the wider parts of the government's agenda. It can't model those changes in the planning system that are so important to the government. It can't model the changes to having a long-term industrial strategy. They can't model our changes to trade policy. So I recognise there is more to do to prove the case of the government's overall commitment, but I can tell him that fundamentally fixing the foundations, honesty and stability in the public finances, and a focus on long-term public investment are essential to the long-term growth of the country. And I would also say, actually, one thing that hasn't had sufficient recognition is that many of the real benefits of greater public investment don't accrue in this Parliament, they accrue beyond it. And it's about time we had some long-term focus again in this country, and not before time, if I may say. And to deliver that investment, OK, I'll give way to the honourable member.
Grateful to the right honourable gentleman, but he, I hope, will be aware that the long-term economic growth of this country relies not primarily on public investment and indeed public infrastructure, but on a healthy private sector. It's the wealth creation, the wealth creators from whom we can take the funding to deliver into those goods which he talks about and which are part of a balanced and successful society. This budget does not help them, it does the opposite.
I'm sorry, but again, the honourable member is wrong. Now, I agree with part of his assessment. I agree that a strong and thriving private sector is crucial to growth. If I may say so to the honourable gentleman, I just find his analysis a little bit simplistic, because what private firms will tell you is they also need a decent transport system. They need skilled workers. They need people being able to get into work. When I, for instance, through many parts of the last government, got up on a morning, I would check my phone for people using that Trans-Pennine line I've just talked about the upgrade to. And it would be full of people saying, I cannot get to work. So I need the honourable gentleman to take a slightly broader analysis than the one he is currently making. But I would also say to him, despite the fact that what they have left us was a raging skip fire in many areas, in terms of the money we have got to raise, not to deliver our pledges, to deliver their pledges that they didn't properly fund. At the same time, we've had a regard and a heed to the level of competitiveness in the UK economy. For instance, on the national insurance the rise to employers' national insurance, over half of all firms with national insurance liabilities will actually pay less or they'll pay the same because of not only the changes to employment allowance, but how we have removed the threshold so all firms now qualify for it. So despite the frankly terrible inheritance bequeathed to us, we've done our best to meet the needs for that and deliver a long-term focus on the future in a way that delivers us long-term growth. I was going to move on, but I can't resist the honourable gentleman.
I hope you'll not be disappointed. Minister, the one look, there's lots of good things in what you've brought forward, what the Minister's brought forward and Government's brought forward. But what isn't there, unfortunately, is for the farmers and the inheritance tax. The farmers are the backbone of Britain. They create the food. Almost all the food we eat in this chamber and across this great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, the farmers produce it. The farmers will be impacted greatly. All the farmers that I've talked to in Northern Ireland, I'm a member of the Ulster Farmers Union declaring interest, and the National Farmers Union here as well. They have indicated that every farmer, they tell me, in Northern Ireland will be impacted by the inheritance tax. If you wanted to get it right, if the government wanted to get it right, then what needs to be done? The threshold needs to be raised. It's not too late, Minister, to do that. Raise the threshold to £4 to £5 million, and that means that the family farms, the backbone of Britain, can continue to be here.
Well, Deputy Speaker, I always genuinely listen to the honourable member because I think he's a genuine conscientious member when it comes to representing his constituency interests. I will always listen to what he has to say. What I would tell him about the threshold is we can judge exactly the impact of these changes because we can look at what the value of claims to date has been. And I do think on a lot of the analysis, certainly the Conservative Party's analysis, what they have forgot to do is aggregate the impact of the changes to those allowances on, for instance, agricultural property relief, alongside the existing nil rate band and the ability to transfer those allowances between spouses in all cases. So actually, if you look at the number, the total number across the UK of farms that would have been affected by this change, it's only 500. The estimate is 500 for the 2026-27 financial year. And I think that has been missed. And I would also remind colleagues on this side, if you have any kind of inheritance tax liability, you have 10 years to pay it, interest-free. So I think, to be frank, some of this is a little bit of scaremongering on the other side, and we've got to be clear with people about what actually the case is. But I will move on a little, Madam Deputy Speaker, because yes, we've had to restore economic stability to deliver that investment, and we shouldn't be shy of pointing out why that has been so necessary, because the previous government's scattergun approach to growth left our country starved of investment, left it economically divided, and left it struggling to maintain a competitive edge in the global economy. Previous claims from the benches opposite to have already delivered the fastest growing economy in the G7, based on its performance in the first half of this year, are frankly laughably false. I believe the Sunday Times described it as a person walking a marathon in 6 hours, but because they ran the last 100 yards, saying they're the fastest runner in the world. The truth is, consistency and stability have been sorely lacking. We had 7 growth strategies since 2010. We had 11 business secretaries in as many years, to say nothing of the UK's revolving door on Prime Minister. I've given the honourable member one go. Let's just make a little bit of progress and see if he can do a better one next time. But the result, Madam Deputy Speaker, was a protracted period of anaemic growth. Had our economy grown at the average rate of other OECD countries over this period, it would have been £171 billion larger. Now, let's just imagine the difference that would make to all of our communities and to this budget debate today. And quite understandably, in the face of uncertainty, British firms just haven't seen investing domestically as a sufficiently attractive proposition. They've been reluctant to adopt new technology, to upskill their employees, or to plough money into R&D. What we've inherited is that in any given year, roughly 40% of UK firms choose not to invest at all. And we want to change that for good. We want to give businesses certainty and confidence and, yes, stability, so they can make decisions for the long term. And that is why, at the budget, the Chancellor reaffirmed our new, modern industrial strategy, Invest 2035. It will be a central pillar of our growth mission. It's a strategy that will let businesses plan not just for the next 10 months, but for the next 10 years. A strategy that's already won the backing of Make UK, who told us that businesses will no longer have to fear the constant chop and change in policy we've seen over the last decade. They can instead focus on the long term. And our industrial strategy will create a strong pro-business environment, making it simpler and cheaper for companies to scale up and invest. And it will unleash the potential of our high productivity services and industries. That's because, Madam Deputy Speaker, our recent economic history has taught us that we have to play to our strengths. Over the last 25 years, high productivity sectors were responsible for roughly 60% of our economy's entire productivity growth. If you look at the figures since 1990, over half the GDP growth in the UK economy has come from just 3 sectors: ICT, financial and professional services, and advanced manufacturing. And that's why our industrial strategy will channel support to 8 key growth-driving sectors, those in which the UK services sector will excel today and tomorrow, the services and industries that present the greatest opportunity for output and productivity growth over the long term. I'll give way to the honourable member.
I thank the right honourable member. Thank you, Deputy Speaker. How does that all gel with the fact that the OBR is saying that business investment will fall by 0.6% as a share of GDP by 2029? It sounds great, but it doesn't add up in the OBR's eyes. Can you please elaborate?
To the honourable member for his intervention. It's a similar question to the one from this side of the House. The wider government's pro-business changes cannot be modelled by the OPR. We have to prove those. We know that. But I can tell him that there is simply no way we will get to the higher business investment, the higher productivity growth, the higher economic and stronger economic growth in all parts of the country we need, unless we're honest and robust and responsible with the public finances in a way this budget does and the previous government did not. And if it sets the trajectory on long-term, strong public investment to leverage in that degree of private investment, if we do not do that, we will not have the foundations to succeed. And that is why I'm so excited by this budget, because it gives us those strong foundations for the future. One more time, go on.
Thank the Secretary of State for giving way. The problem with our economy is too often people build small businesses and then they sell them off. They don't sit on them and develop them and potentially hand them on. Could you explain to me how what he has been proposing in terms of inheritance tax changes are going to encourage people to nurture and grow and take risk on their business in order to pass them on to succeeding generations? Plainly, what he is suggesting is going to have the reverse effect, therefore make the situation worse, and that's going to damage growth.
Again, I'm grateful for the honourable member's intervention, because I would just ask him to look at the detail of the plans. We know from the data the Treasury holds, we can plan for how many firms will be affected by that, and it is a very small number. Now, in most cases, given the use of the existing inheritance tax nil rate band, especially if property is involved and if there's a transfer from one spouse to another in the inheritance chain, the allowance is so great that it is already considerably in excess of the average claim for relief in this area. What the honourable gentleman is talking about is a very small number of firms at the very, very large end. And I think we can have the changes. The revenue can be raised in a way which protects the kind of family firms he and I would want to see to continue to thrive. But what I would say to him is, we all know there are cases of, for instance, people advertising the sale of agricultural land or in certain types of investments, specifically to avoid inheritance tax. Now, that's not right. That's not good for business. We've got to recognise that this is a set of proportionate changes, again, to pay for your honourable members' spending commitments in the last government. And we've done that in a way which is proportionate, it is fair, and it always has a benchmark for international competitiveness, in a way I think the honourable members should recognise rather than scaremonger. Now, as a statement of intent, Madam Deputy Speaker, on our new industrial strategy, at the budget we saw the Chancellor making the first of many down payments with multi-year funding commitments for these areas of our economy. Significant tax relief for our world-leading creative industries. Up to £500 million for a brand new life sciences innovative manufacturing fund. And nearly £1 billion for our aerospace sector, funding vital research and development into jet zero technology and boosting industries in the East Midlands, the South West and Scotland. Plus, Madam Deputy Speaker, £2 billion for our automotive sector, ensuring that the next generation of electric vehicles are designed, developed and built right here in the UK. At the same time, we recognise our industrial strategy's success rests upon working in partnership with mayors and multinationals, with councils and CEOs, with unions and academics. It's why this government is championing local growth plans, which will be growth plans for the long term, delivered by strong local political leadership. They will then work together with this government to create the right conditions for success. And crucially, Madam Deputy Speaker, our new industrial strategy will be international from the start, taking learnings from the best of what has been achieved globally, so we enable businesses of all sizes and sectors to thrive in our market. To that end, it works in lockstep with our trade strategy and our twin-track approach to trade, acceding to the CPTPP and negotiating deals with the Gulf Cooperation Council in India, all to the benefit of British business. But, unlike the previous administration, we're also making it much easier for UK firms to do business in and with Europe. The opposition may not want to hear it, but the EU is not just our closest trading partner, it is still our largest trading partner by quite some margin. Yet, the government's adversarial approach to working with the EU, all of that incendiary rhetoric, that was not conducive for good business. We're changing course, aiming to remove unnecessary barriers